All right, so are you ready to dive into another book with us? Today we are looking at Once Upon a Broken Heart.
Once Upon a Broken Heart.
And I think it's safe to say most people listening are probably fantasy fans, romance fans, maybe big fans of the Caraval series.
Right.
And they just want to know, is this book worth their time?
Yeah.
We've got reviews, we've got background on the author, we've even got reader comments, so let's do this.
Okay, so I'll tell you right off the bat, this book is a ton of fun.
Okay.
It's got all that whimsical magic that, Stephanie Garber is known for.
Right.
But I will say the writing style is very young.
Okay.
It's almost like it's between middle grade and young adult.
Oh, interesting.
So that's something to think about right off the bat.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like some readers are really particular about that.
Yeah,
Especially in the YA fantasy genre.
for sure.
So, assuming that that's not a deal breaker,
Yeah.
what is it about this book that is making people excited?
Well, she takes us to the north, which is a part of the Caraval world that we've only heard whispers about before.
Okay.
And she really leans into that fairy tale vibe, like cobblestones, streets, magic shops. It's very whimsical and charming.
I like that.
But there's also this underlying sense of danger,
Okay.
especially in the underground world that she creates. And you've got these powerful fates that control destiny, ancient curses, and even vampires.
Vampires. Okay, I was not expecting
Yeah.
that. All right, now you've got my attention.
Yeah.
Let's talk characters, though, because for me, that's what really makes or breaks a book.
Right.
So, who are the players in this fairy tale vampire saga?
Okay. Let's start with Jax. He's the one everyone's talking about.
Yep.
He is a fate.
Okay.
So he's immortal, he's incredibly powerful, but he's also cursed.
Mm.
Every woman he kisses dies except for his true love.
Oh, wow. Talk about high stakes.
Oh.
Every kiss is potentially deadly. Okay. I can see why people would have strong feelings about this guy.
Right, and she doesn't shy away from that moral complexity. Like, he's charming, he's witty, but there's definitely a darkness to him.
Okay.
And his backstory is really key to understanding him.
Yeah.
And it makes you question, is he really cruel, or is he just a victim of his own tragic fate?
All right. You've piqued my interest. But what kind of girl falls for a guy who could kiss her to death?
Evangeline Fox.
Evangeline Fox.
So she is a hopeless romantic,
Okay.
grew up on fairy tales, believes in true love, and so she can be a bit naive,
Okay.
which is a criticism that some readers have.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've seen reviews complaining about Evangeline being too trusting, almost to the point of being foolish.
Right.
Is that a fair assessment?
I can see where they're coming from.
Okay.
She doesn't always make the most logical decisions.
Right.
But she's acting out of heartbreak.
Yeah.
Her first love is about to marry her stepsister, and she's desperate to stop it, which is what leads her to make this deal with Jax.
Oh, boy. A heartbroken girl making a deal with a potentially deadly fate.
Exactly.
This sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Right.
Is this where the whole three kisses thing comes in?
You got it. Each kiss is a gamble, and the tension just keeps ratcheting up throughout the book.
Okay.
She's drawn to him.
Right.
Despite knowing the risks, their chemistry is undeniable. There's this push and pull between them that creates a really dynamic relationship. One scene that exemplifies this is their encounter in the mausoleum,
Ooh.
which is full of this charged energy and forbidden desire.
Okay, I'm starting to get it now.
Yeah.
So we've got a unique setting.
Yes.
We've got this morally ambiguous love interest.
Yeah.
And we've got a heroine who, maybe trusts a little too easily.
Right.
But what about the writing style?
Yes.
Because I know for some readers, they felt like her style in Caraval was a little too descriptive, a little too flowery.
Right. So Garber is known for that kind of lush, descriptive prose, and that's what makes her world so immersive. But in this book, the writing is tighter. It's more streamlined, so she still uses vivid imagery and that lyrical language,
Right.
but it doesn't feel as over the top as it did in Caraval.
Gotcha.
And it's definitely more in line with that younger YA audience.
Okay, so it sounds like she's trying to strike a balance between her, signature style
Right.
and the expectations of this genre.
Exactly. And she does a good job of weaving in action and dialogue to break up those descriptive passages.
Okay.
And the pacing is really well done. It keeps you hooked. She sticks to Evangeline's point of view, which heightens that suspense because you're experiencing everything through her eyes.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Speaking of Caraval, I know there's a lot of readers who are wondering how this book connects to that series.
Yeah.
So do you have to have read Caraval before you dive into this one?
That's a great question. And while it is technically part of the same universe, you can enjoy it as a standalone. You don't need to know anything about Caraval to follow the plot.
Okay.
However, there is a significant spoiler for the Caraval trilogy in this book related to the finale of that series.
Oh, okay. Good to know. If you are spoiler sensitive,
Yeah.
maybe hold off on this one until you've read the trilogy.
Exactly. You've been warned.
Okay, I'm taking notes. All right, I have to address the elephant in the room,
Yeah.
the mixed reviews.
Right.
I've seen some pretty harsh criticisms online. Some people found the plot aimless.
Right.
Some people found Evangeline's naivete frustrating. And then there's that sudden appearance of vampires
Yeah.
that seem to throw people off. So what's your take on these criticisms?
I think it's important to acknowledge that this book isn't for everyone.
Okay.
If you prefer complex plots, deeply nuanced characters, a slow burn romance, you might find yourself frustrated with this book.
Okay.
The plot does jump around a bit,
Right.
and there are definitely some unanswered questions, especially towards the end.
Yeah, I saw one review that called the plot a confused nightmare.
Oh, wow.
And then another one complained about all the loose ends.
Right.
Those are pretty strong words.
Yeah, they are. But I also think it's important to consider the target audience.
Okay.
You know, this is clearly geared towards a younger YA audience who
Right.
might not be as concerned with those aspects.
Okay.
For those readers, the fast pace, the whimsical world building, and that sizzling chemistry between Jax and Evangeline might be enough to outweigh any perceived flaws.
So it sounds like it boils down to personal preference.
Right.
If you're looking for, like, a light escapist read with a dash of magic and romance,
Yeah.
this could be a good fit.
Yeah.
But if you need everything tied up in a bow,
Right.
you might want to steer clear.
Exactly. It's all about knowing what you're looking for.
Yeah, and I feel like we've only scratched the surface here.
Yeah.
So let's
Yep.
take a deeper dive into some of the more nuanced aspects of this book and really help our listeners decide
Okay.
if Once Upon a Broken Heart deserves a spot on their TBR pile.
Sounds like a plan. There's a lot more to unpack.
All right, let's do this.
Okay. You know, you mentioned some of those criticisms, like the plot feeling aimless.
Right.
And what's interesting is that that aimlessness might be intentional.
Okay.
If we consider Garber's other works, like the Caraval trilogy,
Right.
she often uses this kind of meandering, almost dreamlike structure to pull readers into her worlds.
That's true.
It's more about the atmosphere and the emotional journey than a tightly plotted, linear narrative.
That's a really good point. I remember feeling similarly about Caraval. Like
Mhm.
it was more about the experience, the sensory details, that feeling of being swept away by the magic.
Exactly. And Once Upon a Broken Heart definitely leans into that immersive style. She throws a lot at the reader.
Yeah.
Fates, curses, vampires, prophecies, but it all serves to create this larger-than-life, almost overwhelming sense of wonder. It's like stepping into a fairy tale where anything is possible.
But wouldn't that make it harder to connect with the characters?
Yeah.
Or even feel invested in the plot?
Not necessarily. Remember, this book is told entirely from Evangeline's perspective.
Right.
So even though the plot might feel sprawling, we're experiencing it through her eyes, feeling her confusion, her excitement, her fear. And that creates a sense of intimacy and immediacy that can be really powerful.
You know, you're right. It's like we're right there with her, stumbling through this magical world,
Yeah.
trying to make sense of it all. Speaking of Evangeline, you mentioned earlier that some readers find her naive.
Yes.
So how does her character arc play out? Does she learn from her mistakes, or is she constantly falling into the same traps?
That is the question. And to be honest, it's one of the most debated aspects of this book.
Okay.
Evangeline does make some questionable decisions,
Right, so-
especially when it comes to trusting Jax.
Right.
But she also shows moments of real strength and cunning. For example, there's a scene where she tricks a group of fates into revealing information,
Okay.
using her perceived innocence to her advantage.
Oh, interesting. So she's not just a damsel in distress waiting for someone to rescue her.
Definitely not. And I think that's important to note, especially given the fairy tale setting.
Right.
Garber subverts some of those classic tropes by giving Evangeline agency a sharp wit.
Mm-hmm.
She might be a hopeless romantic, but she's also resourceful and determined to get what she wants.
That makes me think of another popular YA fantasy series, A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas.
Yes.
The heroine in that series, Fair, also starts out quite naive, but she undergoes this significant transformation. She becomes a powerful warrior in her own right.
Yeah.
Do you see any similarities between Fair and Evangeline?
There are definitely some parallels.
Okay.
Both characters are thrust into these magical worlds they don't understand, and they both fall for dangerous, morally ambiguous love interests.
Yes.
But I think Evangeline's journey is more about self-discovery than becoming a warrior. It's about her learning to trust her instincts, to embrace her own power, and to define love on her own terms.
I like that. It's a more internal, emotional journey, which fits with that fairy tale-like atmosphere of the book.
Exactly. It's a coming-of-age story wrapped in a magical adventure.
Oh, I like that.
And while some readers might find Evangeline's growth too subtle or slow-paced, I think it's realistic given her age and the extraordinary circumstances she's facing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this book has sparked such strong reactions.
Right.
It's playing with some familiar tropes, but also subverting them in interesting ways. But what about those other elements that some readers found jarring?
Yes.
Like the introduction of vampires.
Yeah.
How does that fit into the overall narrative?
That's a great question, and to be honest, it's one I'm still grappling with. The vampires are introduced relatively late in the book, and their purpose isn't entirely clear.
Mm.
Some readers have speculated that they're connected to the Valerie Arch,
Oh, right.
which is this mysterious artifact that's central to the prophecy surrounding Jax.
Right. I remember that being mentioned, but I wasn't sure what to make of it.
Yeah.
It felt like another layer of complexity added to an already intricate plot.
Exactly. And I think that's where some of the criticisms about the plot being aimless come into play.
Okay.
Garber introduces these elements, like the vampires and the Valerie Arch, without fully explaining their significance. It's almost as if she's setting the stage for future installments, leaving readers with more questions than answers.
Which could be frustrating for those who prefer a more self-contained story,
Right.
especially since we don't even have a release date for the sequel.
It's true. That's definitely something to keep in mind if you're considering reading this book.
Yeah.
It ends on a major cliffhanger,
Oh, no.
leaving you desperate to know what happens next. But if you're willing to be patient and trust that Garber has a plan, then those unanswered questions might actually add to the intrigue
Right.
and keep you theorizing long after you've finished reading.
That's a good point. Sometimes the anticipation is half the fun.
Exactly.
But before we get too carried away with speculation, let's bring it back to our main question.
Yeah.
Is Once Upon a Broken Heart worth reading?
Right. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. We've explored the criticisms. We even compared it to other popular YA fantasy series.
We did.
So let's synthesize all of that and give our listeners a clear recommendation.
So we've talked about the good, the bad, and the vampires. But should people read it?
This book, it's like a puzzle box. It's intricate, it's enchanting, but it might leave you feeling a bit frustrated if you're expecting all the pieces to fit neatly together right away.
So more about the journey than the destination.
Yeah, precisely. If you're the type of reader who enjoys being swept away by, lush prose, intricate world building, and a romance that, sizzles with forbidden desire, then this book is for you.
Okay, but what about readers who, are hesitant about that younger writing style? Is there enough substance here?
That's a valid concern, and while the writing is definitely geared towards a younger audience, I wouldn't dismiss it as simplistic. Garber tackles some complex themes like the nature of fate, the power of choice, and, the consequences of sacrificing your heart for what you believe in. And she does it with this lyrical grace. It's hard to resist.
That reminds me of another YA fantasy author, Leigh Bardugo.
Oh, yeah.
She's known for her atmospheric writing and those morally great characters, which we see here too.
Absolutely.
So do you think fans of her Six of Crows duology might enjoy this?
Yeah, I think so. Both authors, they excel at creating worlds that feel both familiar and utterly unique, and they both delve into the complexities of morality. They blur the lines between heroes and villains, and they both craft romances that are equal parts passionate and dangerous. So yeah, if you loved the gritty world of Six of Crows, I think you'd find a lot to appreciate in Garber's storytelling.
That's a great comparison. But, let's be realistic. This book isn't perfect. We've talked about the pacing, the unanswered questions, and, the potential for frustration with Evangeline.
True, but I think those flaws are outweighed by the book's strengths. Garber is a master of creating these immersive worlds that feel like you can step right into them. She crafts characters that are flawed but ultimately relatable, and she writes with this passion that's contagious. So even if the plot isn't perfectly tied up, even if Evangeline makes some questionable decisions, you're still left with this lingering sense of wonder and a desire to know more.
Okay, so final verdict. Is it worth the gamble?
So here's my recommendation. If you loved Caraval, if you crave a fairy tale-like escape, and if you're willing to embrace a story that's more about the journey than the destination, then absolutely pick up this book. But if you need everything neatly explained, if you prefer your characters to be perfectly rational, and if you hate cliffhangers, then you might want to wait and see how the series develops before diving in.
Right. I think our listeners have everything they need to make a decision.
I hope so. The best way to know if you'll enjoy a book is to read it for yourself. But hopefully, this deep dive gave you a glimpse into that magical world and helped you decide if it's a journey you want to take.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us on this adventure. And to all of our listeners out there, happy reading. And don't forget to check out the show notes for links to buy the book, the author's website, all those resources that we talked about. And let us know what you think. Until next time, keep those pages turning.